Good afternoon. I'm excited to present to you with our latest work, and I would like to acknowledge my colleagues, my co-authors, and also my affiliations, and also state that I do not have any conflict of interest regarding this study. So our study is focusing on behavior maintenance, and when we talk about this, we are talking about a very complex theme. Just think about yo-yo diets and the idea of yo-yo exercise regimens that we start and end. And it is very common now as we are ending our summer break and we try to recover to our previous healthy habits. And we go to a congress where we have the Seville tapas and there's very warm outside and we don't want or need or are able to return to our previous healthier lifestyles. And this topic is something that we have been studying for over 20 years, the group that I'm involved with, and usually using the self-determination theory rationale. We will also be revisiting a 2009 article in this present study and trying to replicate those analyses. So we are looking into behavior maintenance. We know now that it's very different from behavior initiation, and this consideration led to an updated model for the self-determination theory health behavior maintenance model. So we now have the antecedents that are affecting the way that we feel satisfied on our psychological basic needs. And if that happens, we get into the green area here of motivation. We want to do things, and when we want to do stuff, we are increasing the likelihood of sustaining that behavior. On the other hand, if those antecedents are leading to frustration, we get into the motivation, this red thing here, the have to do things, and this is decreasing the likelihood of sustaining the behavior. And this was studied in 2009, and at that point we noticed that there was kind of a spillover effect from the exercise-related motivations to the eating-related motivations. So we noticed that good autonomous motivation to exercise spilled over to the eating-related motivation. And this study was done in 2,039 participants, all women, 1 year study, and all measures were done by questionnaires. So what we want to do in this study is to extend and replicate that the 2009 study, because now we have a richer data set, we have more data points, a larger sample, and this will allow us to look into cross-legged effects. So instead of just looking for a causal pathway model from one side to the other, we can see if there are mutual causal effects, bidirectional effects. And the variables that we are going to look into are related to the whys. So you see here exercise motivation and eating motivation, whys, at baseline 6 months and 12 months, and then the whats, steps and intake. And we are using the ideas from Judy Paul in this book of why. So to do this, we have been using the know-how study, and this is an ancillary study of that project that was funded by the European Commission. 5-year study, 3 countries. The trial was conducted in 3 countries with 1,600 people. But for this present study, we are using complete data for baseline 6 months and 12 months. So we have this sample, more women than men, but we have men. They are fairly active, and all of them have lost at least 5% of their weight before entering the study. So this is a maintenance study. The data collection was relied on questionnaires to measure the whys, the motivation variables, and an objective measure for steps. We call that the whats and caloric intake via food diaries. Finally, we have an analytical plan that's relied on the RStudio for the more basic stuff and M+ for the cross-legged analysis. Regarding our results, first we're going to look at the differences and correlations. There's nothing major happening here, so everything was as expected, in line with previous studies, and so we can move into our main course. And our main course has two models, a model with the motivation path, so the one with autonomous motivation, and another model with the motivation path, the controlled motivation model. And as you can see here, we have noticed that there are some cross-legged effects. For example, here from the autonomous exercise motivation at baseline, 4 steps is causing steps at 6 months. But we also see that steps are at baseline are causing 6 months autonomous motivation to exercise. So cross-leg effect. We see that exercise autonomous motivation at 6 months is causing future eating motivation. And finally, that the intake at baseline is causing less steps at 6 months. Looking very briefly at these whys and whats that we have found out here, the whys are in green, whats are in blue. We can say that there is an entanglement between the steps and motivation to exercise. This potentially leads to a sustained behavior for the long periods. So for a motivation feedback loop that is very interesting. On the other end, we have the baseline intake that is predicting steps at 6 months, and we were able to revisit the study from Entanglement, and we were able to replicate those results in the sense that autonomous motivation to exercise is affecting future autonomous motivation to eat, the way that we regulate ourselves to eat. So these results are potentially pointing to sustained behaviors at the long term. Now let's go to the dark side, so to the controlled motivation, to the motivation model. All these models have good fit. I didn't say that in the beginning, but they add a good adjustment to the data. So now we see here that motivation to exercise at baseline is affecting motivation to eat at 6 months, but also eating motivation at baseline is affecting exercise motivation. So we have a cross leg here from baseline to 6 months, and also from 6 months to 12 months in the whys, in the motivation side of things. We also see that exercise control motivation is affecting future intake. And finally, something very interesting for us is that the whys, the whats, steps, and intake are affecting future whys. So you see here that steps and intake are affecting future eating motivation. So in terms of brief discussions, we can see that there is an entanglement between the whys, exercise, eating, control, motivation. So they seem to feed each other. And this is a very bad cycle in terms of motivation. So we don't think it's going to be sustainable in terms of behavior. And we can also see that there are some behaviors that feed the way we motivate ourselves. So baseline intake is causing more eating control motivation and less steps. And baseline steps is also causing eating motivation. So we see that detrimental behaviors seem to spill over to more motivation to eat. Finally, that exercise control motivation is causing more intake at 6 months. So let's go into our conclusions. 1 minute, let's see how it goes. So we have this idea that this is still a running thing. We are writing articles, so we know about some limitations. We have some ideas for future studies. But for now, we want to hear your comments on the following. So concerning the whys and the whats, we noticed that there is a 6 month entanglement between motivation to exercise and steps. So in the sense, the whys of doing exercise is affecting exercise itself, but also the exercise we do is affecting the way that we motivate ourselves. So we can explain this via effective mechanisms, processes such as the ones that Ekekakis has studied and is studying now, or the idea of habits. And that is very interesting for behavior management. We also see that motivation to exercise is causing more intake. So it seems that if I motivate myself externally to exercise, I'm kind of going against my values, going against something that I don't want to do, and this leads to ego depletion, and ego depletion sometimes leads to higher intake. And finally, that more baseline intake and less steps, so behaviors, what we do is affecting the whys in the future in terms of eating. So when we misbehave, maybe we try to compensate things by resourcing to masturbation because we believe that maybe it was effective, and it's not, as you may know. Finally, concerning the whys in isolation, maybe the most important things here is that we can go into a spiral of bad motivation, as we noticed in our models, but we can also go into a spiral of good motivation. So in the sense that exercise motivation spilled over to eating motivation in the future. As a close, to close this study, so we go back to our previous model, and that model was very from left to right, so we have antecedents, mechanisms, and outcomes, but we can see here that maybe the outcomes are feedbacking, are doing a loop of feedback to the motivation themselves. So in the sense that what we do may lead to better motivation, or if it doesn't go well, to less good motivation. So this is what I have for you. I'm waiting for your comments and looking forward to discuss this with you.